Good evening, and as always, welcome to your favorite program, the UWI and You. Earlier in fact, late May, we had someone special coming from St. Augustine campus, one of the 4 campuses of the University of the West Indies, to address something which we prepare for every June till November. Sometimes it happens in December. As you can recall, last year there was severe drought, in fact floods in Dominica, St. Vincent and St. Lucia. But as always, the University of the West Indies has a mandate to inform persons, to educate. And that is what will be extracted from what took place last month, but being fed to you on the 3rd Thursday of the month of June. And you are still wondering, what are we going to be talking about? Well, we'll address the topic, storms, floods, and droughts in the Caribbean, and how climate change may impact our economies and society. So that is very relevant to you. And with all of you viewing and listening to your favorite program, please pay absolute attention to everything that is being said. I have 2 guests with me, one from the University of the West Indies and an alumnus of the West Indies, University of the West Indies, who works here as the acting director of disaster management. And from St. Augustine, Dr. Matthew Wilson. No relation, but possibly, if I look in my background, he's here with us. So we will read to them. Let's have a word for our sponsors.
I'm part of a tough, smart,
constantly evolving,
never too old to learn community of human beings.
proud of country,
Proudly Caribbean, global citizens.
with convenient access to over 400 learning programs
Delivered both online and face-to-face.
from the Caribbean's University of First Choice.
My mind,
My life.
my world of possibilities is wide open.
Call, click, or visit the UWI Open Campus.
Dr. Matthew Wilson, welcome to Dominica. And as we do with all our guests, for the past 5 years we've been having this promotional program of the UWI, that which is dear to the region, this academic institution. Welcome to Dominica. You may have been here before. You will let us know about that. And I should also say welcome to my other guests. That is Mr. Don Corriette, the acting director of disaster management. He is here because I know so little about climate change, and why shouldn't we get the perspective of a local who is so much involved in it? But first, Dr. Matthew, you have to inform the Dominican public. Who are you?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for your welcome. It's great to be here in Dominica. It's a beautiful island. It's actually my 2nd visit. I came a while back in 2007, but only for a couple of days, so I didn't get a chance to spend any time. I was too busy with meetings and work and so on. So thankfully this time I get to spend a little bit longer and explore a bit of this island. So it's really great to be here. I'm from University of West Indies, as you said, St. Augustine campus. I'm the head of the Department of Geography there. So we've set up a new department. The department started in August 2013. We've been running programs in geography for the last few years, since around about 2007. And so we're trying to promote and spread the word of education and study, and in particular, my time here in Dominica is talking about something very relevant to society, a very geographical topic of climate change and how it may impact on us.
Okay, but just simply tell us, where does geography fit in? Is it a true science? And when I say true science, is it like physics and chemistry and biology? Or is it some sort of social science? I think you gave a definition of the realm of geography, or the linkage between geography and these sciences that we spoke of.
Well, geography is a fascinating discipline because it's all-encompassing. Which makes it extremely interesting to study, because you look at so many different topics it does incorporate aspects of physics and chemistry and biology, but it's not a pure science, it's an applied science. So how does climate change affect our society, for example? That has physical science in the atmosphere and how that works and how that functions. It has engineering and how we try to take climate models and look at the impact, for example, of floods on a particular local area. And it also has social science in that how does that flood event impact on the communities living in that particular area, and how can society as a whole manage the flood events and manage climate more generally, climate changes going forward. So geography is a great discipline to study if you are interested in having a holistic view and being able to move forward in a good way.
Okay, so usually, thank you, Dr. Matthew Wilson, because many persons, when they speak of geography, they think of knowing which capital is where, and that is where it ends. But there is so much more to that discipline, and we will find out much more as we speak of climate change and its impact in the Caribbean, and we may focus on Dominica. So let us move to a Dominican, Don Corriette. Don, where do you hail from? I think I describe you as an alumnus of the University of the West Indies. Tell us your history.
Yes.
This is your life, Don Corriette.
Yes. Actually, I graduated from Mona in 1993 with honors, and again graduated from Kiville with an MBA in 2000. So I can click.
You're very much
came to being a UE apostle. But interestingly, continuing from where Dr. Wilson left off, I'm from the Office of Disaster Management. I'm the National Disaster Coordinator acting. And we have taken on board in our comprehensive disaster management approach issues of climate change. And he mentioned the discipline, the geography discipline that looks at all the physics, the topography, the social aspect, and under the comprehensive disaster management strategy that we are pushing at the Office of Disaster Management, ongoing of, I'll mention it as the ODM, is an approach that involves all people at all phases of disasters or hazards, and to include all societies, all disciplines in society, so private sector, public sector, civil society. And the approach is to now get everybody on board, since disaster management is everybody's business, stealing something from probably the Ministry of Tourism. And now we are mainstreaming now climate change, which is real, into disaster management, into the disaster management strategy.
Okay, so Don, the only thing you did not tell us, because by Dr. Matthew Wilson making reference to the University of the West Indies, where he's based, and establishing the geography department and focusing, as his expertise is, on climate change, your organization, disaster management, is there any regionality about it? Do you link up with the other Caribbean territories?
Yes, definitely. We do a lot of work with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA. We're also associated with the University of the West Indies through the Seismic Research Network Center in Trinidad and Tobago, St. Augustine, and also the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology in Barbados. And so we coordinate and we collaborate with those agencies, and we can safely say that they are strong arms of UE. Most of our programs, what we call, has a regional flavor. In other words, what we do here is harmonized with what we do in St. Lucia, Antigua, under the CDEMA mandate. So yes, we do a lot of collaboration.
Fantastic. So if you or I were to look out of our window, we will know what the weather is. So all of us are experts, aren't we? But I think I would like from Dr. Matthew Wilson a definition of climate change. Not too scientific, but just so that we all can digest. Because as we said, we are all experts on weather. We just look out, we know it's raining, sunshine, you know, and particularly if it's cricket, then you know it's going to rain. Dr. Matthew.
Thank you.
Wilson.
It's an important question, and quite often we get asked this exact question. You can think in simple terms of climate as simply the average weather that we experience. Average weather and variability in weather. So for example, here in the tropics, in the wet tropics, we have a particular temperature. We have seasonality in that temperature, and we have seasonality in the rainfall too. We have a wet season, we have a dry season. So what are the average conditions that we get over a long period of time of years, decades, even longer? So when we talk of climate change, we are talking about changes in those average conditions. So the average weather may be changing, is what we're referring to. But weather is a much shorter term thing. Weather is something that happens today, happens tomorrow. It's not something that is happening on average over a long period of time. That's climate.
Okay, so again, people in Dominica and in the tropics, in the Caribbean, may just think, Dr. Wilson, of wet and dry. That is, we're not like the temperate countries where there's probably a distinctive winter, autumn, spring, and summer.
Except to say that we have a wet and a dry season.
Okay.
And the variability Dr. Wilson is talking about there, you can have an extreme wet season or extreme dry season. And what we have to do is
a measurement of that
over time
is
to see if
climate change.
If the climate is in fact changing. I like to say weather is what you're experiencing now. Climate is what is to come. What is so you look outside the window, it's raining, it's sunny. That's the weather for today.
Yes.
Climate is what is expected over your season, which is a dry season, which is a wet season. Average, you expect a certain amount of rainfall. When that rainfall becomes excessive over a period of time, over decades, over 20, 25 years, as compared to the last 25 years, you now can analyze whether in fact your climate season is in fact changing.
Okay, so that leads nicely into asking the expert on climate change, that is Dr. Matthew Wilson. Climate change, what people want to know, what will it lead to?
Well, climate change is like we were talking, is perhaps the most important aspect of things going forward for humanity to deal with.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but a lot of people are visual in Dominica, as well as, well, very oral, but visual. So you can use some of what you had in your lecture.
Some of the lecture
yes.
slides that I had.
Climate change will lead to?
What we can expect is three primary changes. There are many changes that we would expect, but in primary we would be expecting temperature changes. So we're expecting temperatures to increase towards the end of the century. They're already observed to be increasing now. Over the last 100 years or so, on average around the world, we've had around about just a bit less than 1 degree rise. And by the end of this century, we're looking between 1 and 4 degrees rise, depending on what measures we take. We also expect to have more warmer nights and more hot days. So these are you can see here we're again talking about likelihoods or chances of things happening. We're expecting to get more of these kinds of events. The second aspect that climate change will lead to is changes in rainfall, and in particular changes in the variability of rainfall, perhaps more intense storms, but also drying by the end of the century. So this may sound counterintuitive in a way. We have drying, but also more intense storms, so heavier rainfall. Essentially, what the research is showing is that when rainfall does occur, it's likely to be more intense, be in a much shorter period of time. So we have two problems here to deal with. We have increased likelihood of droughts and also an increased likelihood of floods resulting from heavy storms. The third thing is changes to the ocean. and in particular sea level rise. At the moment, the IPCC, that is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the United Nations, their fifth assessment report, which was published in late 2013, that indicates that sea level rise will be around about, on average, 1 or 2 meters higher by the end of the century, global average. The Caribbean may, in fact, experience a little bit more sea level rise as it's closer to the equator. This is already leading to erosion of shorelines and inundation of low-lying area, and it also exacerbates storm surge. So when we think about a storm surge from a hurricane or something like that, if we have a little bit more sea level rise, then that storm surge will be that little bit worse, and so we're going to have greater problems with the similar size events. Finally, there's acidification, which is referring to a process by which the oceans soak up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We're releasing lots and lots of carbon dioxide, and the oceans absorb 30 to 40% of that carbon dioxide. It reacts with the water to produce carbonic acid, and so there's a little bit of acidification going on. It's projected by around about half a pH reduction or acidification. That has implications for corals and fisheries and things.
Okay, so there we have it. Temperature change, rainfall, as you said, it never rains, but when it does, it pours. So that is what we should expect, and subsequent floods. And then you spoke of the third change was, I can't recall, the third change?
Ocean changes.
Ocean changes,
yeah.
And acidification of the sea. Human beings as well as animals cannot live in high acid content, you may say. More acidic, more liable to breakdown of those sensitive proteins and what have you in our bodies, as well as in plants and animals. But Don, what Dr. Wilson has just mentioned, what climate change will lead to, you are left with the task to manage that.
Yes.
Tell us what is happening in Dominica, considering those three things, major things, that high rainfall, high increase in temperature, and changes in the ocean.
Okay. Fortunately, the ODM is not alone. We have the Department of Environment Coordinating Unit of the Ministry of Agriculture, actually who is the focal point on climate change. And together with other partners and other stakeholders, we are beginning, as I said earlier in my introductory remarks, to streamline climate change adaptation into our CDM programs, into our comprehensive disaster management programs. And that takes in a lot of areas: awareness, sensitization, training, workshops, simulation exercises, modeling. So Dr. Wilson spoke of sea level rise, and so we're looking at doing some modeling on the West Coast in particular, low-lying areas, for coastal surges and inundation. We're also looking at the tsunami threat, and along those areas we are trying to do a project through SIDEMA and UNDP to have certain coastal areas tsunami ready. And so these are some of the programs we are doing, not alone, because the ODM, quite frankly, can't take up all the challenges that climate change is going to be throwing at us. So we have done a lot of programs, for example, in the Ministry of Agriculture for adaptation in terms of droughts, in terms of heavy rainfalls, trying to get more resilient crops, for example, trying to do farming in a more scientific method. Also with the fisheries, in terms of coastal coral reef management, and a lot of other agencies are partnering with us through SIDEMA, funding from SIDEMA sometimes, and other friendly agencies to bring the realities of climate change into the whole disaster management portfolio.
Okay. Dr. Wilson, is there any synergy between what Don Corriette has just described? It seems a lot is happening even in Dominica, and I would think in the region. But he did mention at the start that UWI is also involved. Are you aware of all those activities that are taking place with those CDMs you refer to them as?
Well, it's a comprehensive disaster management
program in the region, or strategy.
And then the ECU is also doing a very elaborative program with the World Bank that encompasses most of the ministries and also players in the private sector.
Okay, so where does UWI fit in? Because I think you will probably focus a lot on research. Yes.
Well, yes, UWI does have a strong research mandate, and it is, there's our projects in climate change and the impacts on society and how we can improve management and the tools and things we need to be able to manage in a well-informed way. There are projects in Jamaica at Mona, in Cave Hill and Barbados, and also in Trinidad. So UWI does have a strong research mandate, and it is contributing and working with our partners around the region to really kind of create solutions, come up with solutions to the problem of climate change for our region. So we are trying to lead the way in that. Mm-hmm. But also, of course, UWI has a very strong mandate in education, which I think we'll come to.
Yes, and in the latter part, we will speak a little much more about the education aspect. But there is in Trinidad, I think, a seismic unit, and Don is probably very well aware of them. They almost seem to be here, like every month they come here to Dominica.
I won't say every month, but we have
a little exaggeration.
Yes, we have contact with. We stay in contact with the Seismic Research Center for more than one reason. As you know, we have 9 volcanic centers on Dominica, but also they are putting in some instrumentation. In fact, late last month, into early June, we had them on island doing a new station at Salisbury, and that station is intended to monitor large earthquakes, but also importantly to serve as an early warning system for tsunamis and coastal surges as a result of storms and hurricanes. So it will serve the purpose of early warning for us and also for data collection. Data collection is one of the weak points in most of our islands, and the instrumentation that is being upgraded on Dominica will provide us with some more accurate or more reliable data, so that can influence decision making. So the Seismic Research Center, as I said, is frequently in touch with Dominica, the ODM, and for purposes of improving our network.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Wilson, there are, I think you raised the issue, there are 2 major concerns. There is Mother Nature, the natural things like volcanoes, etc. And there is the human effect. Can you tell us, how does that fit in, and which one has the greatest impact on climate change?
Well, we need to be careful to deal with them in tandem. It's difficult to answer that question, say this one or that one has the greatest impact, because there's so much variability.
Or if not impact, what is our greatest concern?
It's a combination.
And what is most manageable? Or what can we eventually, I'll be asking you, what can we do? What can Felix Wilson do? What can Matthew Wilson do? What can Don Corriette do? Yes.
Well, our region is inherently climate sensitive. If we take a look at the slides again, we can see that our region is sensitive for several reasons. We have seasonality for a start. So we have wet and dry seasons, and half the year, or a bit less than half the year, it doesn't rain much, and so we have dry conditions. And then in the wet season, it rains a lot. But we also have topography is a key factor. We have some islands are very steep, such as Dominica. We have high mountains and very steep mountains. Other islands are very low-lying, such as in the Bahamas. And many of our islands are very small too. This makes us very sensitive to climate. We're sensitive to weather systems and so on. But also many of our livelihoods are linked to climate. So our economies are based in agriculture or tourism, fishing and mining. And we have some diseases which are strongly correlated with things like temperature, distribution of mosquitoes, such as dengue. And there are some critical sectors within the region which are vulnerable, sensitive to climate, such as water. Water obviously depends on rainfall, and energy as well. That sensitivity that we have and the variability that we experience in climate leads to vulnerability. But there's a large part of vulnerability which is social. So how well people are able to cope with the variability in the rainfall, with events like storms and so on, depends to a large extent about their social factors, such as how good their house is, where their house is located, whether or not they have resources to be able to rebuild and recover. So we really need to look at the picture in a holistic sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something which caught my interest is that you spoke of where people are building houses now. Dominica, I think, has a particular problem where there isn't much coastal resorts like what Don owns, I think. You live on the beach, Don?
It depends.
It depends. He probably has several homes. But what I'm getting to is that we are increasingly building on hillsides, Dr. Wilson. Something I observed too, Don, you may correct me, apart from Roseau area where there is a central sewage system, most of our houses on hillsides, which we are expanding now on the hillsides, have septics. And that has implication for land seepage. What are your views on that, Dr. Wilson?
Well, building on hillsides is risky for several reasons. Firstly, by removing the forest, you are not allowing the water to seep into the land and be held back when it rains. You're essentially enabling it to run off very fast. So it runs off downstream, and if the slopes are steep, which they are here, then it will run off downstream very fast, and it accumulates, and this contributes to flooding. So we need to avoid building on steep slopes, on hillsides, for simple reasons of flooding. But also there are water quality issues by any kinds of development, and in particularly, as you mentioned, seepage from septic tanks could be important, particularly if we are extracting water from the ground to be able to use for drinking. So that's an issue too. Really, a lot of islands have this problem. There's not much land to build on, like you mentioned. The coastal fringe is fairly small in most islands, and we need to avoid building down at the coast anyway because of sea level rise. And so naturally we would migrate uphill into steeper areas. But at the same time, that has problems too. So what we really need is a carefully coordinated plan for where we can build. And each island will have to come up with its own solutions to that. But it's all very well having a plan, it also needs to be enforced. Of course.
So, Don, that's where you come in.
Well, again, collaboration.
Are you being asked to be a policeman? You have to enforce?
Not yet.
Do you give information to the general public through probably the arm of government, of giving information that will help people decide on where they build and how they build, etc.?
Yes, okay. Well, again, collaboration under the CDM, again, I have to go back to comprehensive, and that's what it means, comprehensive, all-encompassing. And so we sit on a committee with the planning authority that is now putting together a land use planning policy, and that is going well. We also were part of a legislation process with the Environmental Coordinating Unit, and that legislation is well advanced. I think it's parliamentary ready. And also the disaster management, the comprehensive disaster management legislation, which is also in its final draft. But having all the legislation, according to Dr. Wilson, now comes the enforcement part. But enforcement should be the last resort. So what we're embarking on is to educate, to sensitize, to get the awareness going that certain practices, human practices, can result in the man-made disasters we are experiencing.
Yeah, Don, when we come back after a word from our sponsors, we'll hear more about your police activities.
Yes.
I'm part of a tough, smart,
Constantly evolving,
never too old to learn community of human beings.
proud of country,
Proudly Caribbean, global citizens.
with convenient access to over 400 learning programs
Delivered both online and face-to-face.
from the Caribbean's University of First Choice.
My mind,
My life.
my world of possibilities is wide open.
Call, click, or visit the UWI Open Campus.
Now, I think that people know what climate change is. As I say, you do it all the time. You look out of your window and you know what weather it is. And if you can measure, or as these two experts are doing, tracking weather over a period of time and informing persons as to what is really happening in terms of our climate and the changes. And I think what you are really interested in now is to find out what can you do about it. Not only UWI giving information, doing research, not the manager here of the, is it CDM? But all of us, what is our responsibility? And let me start the ball rolling with Dr. Wilson again to tell us, what should we really do? Or why should I really bother? Does it really matter?
Well, sure, it really does matter.
Oh,
It matters to our children and our children's children, and the kind of future societies that we want to have in our future viability, if you like. There's 4 key areas where action is needed, I think, and in some of those areas there's definitely a strong role for the individual person. So if we come back to the graphics, the 4 key areas are firstly mitigation. That's the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to try to limit the changes to climate. On this graph here you can see what is projected for climate change, and we don't want to be here at the end of the century. That is referring to a 4 degrees Celsius rise in temperatures, global average temperatures, due to unsustainable growth and high emissions. We'd much rather be here. That is around about a 1 degree rise. That is if we become much more sustainable. We reduce our emissions to a great extent and limit the global temperature increases. So we are committed already to some temperature increases. We need to reduce those temperature increases through reductions of greenhouse emissions. Now you might be wondering, we're just a small island, we don't produce much, which is very true. Most of the emissions come from developed nations and some rapidly developing nations such as China. But what we need to try to lobby those emitters to reduce their emissions. Now we have representation from the Alliance of Small Island States, and they speak on our behalf, but we need to try to make their voice as loud as possible. And so what individuals can do is lobby their parliamentarians to speak up and raise their concerns and try to push for as strong a lobbying as possible. To try to get the major emitters to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that they are producing. At the same time, we should also look at our own carbon emissions to lead by example. The second aspect there is also as well as reducing our own emissions and producing a green economy based on conservation and renewable energy, we should also protect our forests. And I'm happy to see that Dominica is really leading by example there. It's got a great ecotourism, conservation and sustainability already. So it can continue to lead the way in this and set an example for the rest of the Caribbean and indeed other nations around the world. Secondly is adaptation. Now this is something that can come much more to the individual. So this is making adjustments to the changes that we are facing. We need really to base this on evidence and make it build resilience, and we need to avoid mad adaptation, which is referring to projects which don't really work. So we don't want to do things which will actually cause more harm than good. But the key point about adaptation is many of the measures that we need to take to adapt to climate change are actually desirable in any case. They're desirable as development initiatives, irrespective of climate change. These are known as no regret or low regret solutions. So we should pursue these as a priority. So, for example, wastewater recycling is a key one. We purify drinking water and then flush it down the toilet. This is not very sensible, and all nations, to a large extent, do this. So, recycling our water, trickle irrigation to reduce the amount of loss and increase the efficiency of irrigation, and conversion to non-fossil fuel-based energy to reduce the amount of emissions that we have and reduce our dependency on petroleum, which we have to import, and the prices are increasing, and so on. So those are the two broad ways that we can move forward. The other two, if you want me to continue
yes.
now, is let me just say, mitigation and adaptation should be considered together. If we adapt or try and adapt to what we think will be climate, but we don't mitigate and climate changes even more, then of course we may lose the benefits. So, for example, flood impacts. These increase our vulnerability of the infrastructure and increase the vulnerability of the built environment. What we need to do is implement comprehensive disaster risk management. I'm very happy to see that is being implemented in Dominica. And what that needs to be is it needs to be informed by climate change. So we need to have high quality hazard maps and risk analyses informed by the impacts or possible impacts of climate change. We need to improve land use planning. We were talking about that just now. So that includes updating of codes and zoning laws, but also enforcement to try to make sure that the plan that is put in place is stuck to. We need to be careful when considering major infrastructure so that we take into account climate change as part of the risk analyses that are produced when planning those. And we need to develop good, rigorous policies for adaptation and disaster risk reduction. With regard to drought, where we have increased vulnerability of water resources and reduced agricultural yields, the key area that we should be focusing on is integrated water resources management. That word integrated means it captures everyone that uses water and tries to manage water in as efficient way as possible. So it includes things like recycling and reuse of water and increased water storage and more efficient use of water for irrigation, development of drought-resistant varieties and diversification of crops and crop cycles. So you can see several measures there that we can take, and I think you can probably agree that each one of those measures is desirable in any case, irrespective of climate change. This is what we should be doing. But the climate change gives us added impetus to implement these policies and try to improve society as best as possible. But we need to be mindful of the projections of climate so that we can factor that into these two example management strategies that I've outlined. The third thing is education, which I think we want to talk about much more. Education is a key thing. It's one of the major reasons that the university is here, to educate. Education increases and enhances awareness. So we need to educate at all levels, school through university. That's exactly what this program is about. We need to give the public access to information and disseminate that information, and also train industry and government professionals much more. They should all be aware of climate change and how we need to act. The key thing is that education leads to empowerment to make decisions and take action.
Yeah, well, how interesting. And as you said, education, what many people say is the key. People need to be informed, and that's what we are doing right now. And that was done in a lecture at the end of May at the Fort Young Hotel, the NBD UWI Distinguished Lecture, which is in its 7th year. But I always want to know what is happening in Dominica, and who best to inform us. Mr. Don Corriette. Don, where are we with all that has been said?
Well, one of the strong components of the ODM is outreach and awareness programs, and we use a number of agencies to help us do that. We use the Ministry of Agriculture. We have been collaborating with the Ministry of Agriculture and targeting the agricultural sector in mainstreaming disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction into the whole policy of their programs. And that has been going very, very well. As Dr. Wilson mentioned, we need to do some more critical analysis of our land use. It can't be as usual anymore. We have to factor in climate change as an element or a part of the equation.
Yeah.
And
Don, I just want to not interrupt you, but you'll continue your thoughts. But is there any significant irrigation taking place in Dominica? I say that in the background that Dominicans, if you tell them about water recycling, which Dr. Wilson has just mentioned, may wonder, what is he talking about?
Yes.
We have an abundance of water.
Yes.
Hey, 365 rivers.
Yes.
So why should we care about recycling water?
I think the Ministry of Agriculture probably will want to give you the details on the irrigation projects that they have undertaken. But yes, that is a concern, because we have, the notion is that we have 365 rivers and all the water runs into the sea. So what do you tell me about wasting water and conserving water? But water harvesting and water treatment and water distribution is expensive, and therefore we need to conserve. The other thing is that not all the areas in Dominica have access to gravity flow water. So again, getting waters to certain parts of the island is expensive, and we can do a lot more conserving on our properties and save cost. But the reality is that the climate is changing, and there might be periods of extreme drought that require us now, for food security, to have a ready supply of available water for our continuity in the sector. Having said that, the other programs we are doing with schools under the OFDA, the Office of the USAID OFDA, for which Mr. Shillingford is the focal point, Mr. Cecil Shillingford, former disaster coordinator. And we have a number of school safety programs where we tend to bring the education of DRR and DRM and climate change into the school programs. What we would like to see, though, is a deliberate policy from the Ministry of Education, where we can get climate change, DRR, DRM, and CDM into the curriculum of the schools. Not only the primary and secondary schools, but up to the college level, because it's that important. The events of last year, for example, December 24th floods, brings home the reality that we need to factor in education in our mitigation, as Dr. mentioned, in our adaptation. It's becoming a science. Well, not becoming a science. It is a science that requires now research and proper analysis, so that we can inform our sustainable development going forward.
Okay. Don, I like that you brought in this, what happened last year, because it was shocking to many Dominicans that Dominica could flood. Can you imagine? We see ourselves as steep hillsides, and we have so many rivers, and everything flows down to the sea. I had one little concern. Some dry river beds where people were dumping old fridges and stoves, etc. I hope they stop doing that. So we created a natural damming effect.
Okay, going back to Dr. Wilson again, it's a social behavior change now. Yes. We have to do, because we can't continue to indiscriminately dump our solid waste into waterways, or to build indiscriminately without planning permission, without taking into consideration the type of soil, the type of slope, the type of building. I always say sometimes that when we were growing up as young guys, when I went to my father's estate or my grandfather's estate, I had to get permission to cut a tree. I couldn't just take a cutlass and go and cut a tree. Today we see people cutting windbreaks for view.
Indiscriminately.
They want to see they want to have a view, so they cut windbreaks. They cut trees along the counter, and that weakens that adds to the stability of the soil, unstabilizes the slope. And so we have to have a social and a behavioral change, and that we can only do through continuous education. Okay,
and education comes from research. So Dr. Wilson, what kind of research is the University of West Indies engaging?
Well, we have several ongoing research projects across the Caribbean, across the 3 campuses. Firstly, I would mention that at Mona, there's a climate studies group which is leading the way in producing climate models for the region, focused particularly on the Caribbean. So they are at a better resolution, so we can resolve the islands in a better way. One of the problems with global models of climate is that they don't resolve to the scale at which we have the events such as the one that we saw in December, just the end of last year. So they are really leading the way with the development of higher resolution, more detailed models for the region, and they're doing that in conjunction with some colleagues in Cuba, Institute of Meteorology and INSMET, and also the 5 Cs. In other areas too, we have projects looking at various aspects of the impacts of climate change. So, for example, my own research is in flood risk, and I'm working with a colleague at Mona in flooding in Jamaica. And how the climate may be impacting on flooding in a few of the catchments there. And I'm also doing a similar project in Trinidad, looking at the impact of climate change on flood risk in the Caroni River in Trinidad. At Cave Hill too, there are researchers running projects looking at environmental management and aspects of water and security under a changing climate. So we're very much engaged in research, and I think the key thing is that we're not waiting for outside researchers to come in and tell us what to do. We're actually leading the way for our region, which is a crucial thing. We need to come up with our own solutions, the best solutions we can, and that means that we need to run our own research projects.
Okay, and I'm not being partisan here. I think Dr. Wilson made mention of Mona, Cave Hill, and St. Augustine as 3 campuses of the University of the West Indies. They are bricks and mortar. That type of scientific research is not taking place in the open campus, but I think the open campus can be part of that research by doing what we're doing now. Use the open campus as the advocates, like the other 3, on climate change. So I think we do fit in there as a family, a body. So don't think that we are only talking about free campuses where the actual research is taking place. I was so moved when Dr. Wilson made mention of a young girl who did some research here.
Lucia Edwards.
Lucia Edwards done some research on Collio.
Collio, yes.
Yeah, but Don,
and we did
these programs, we would stay all day talking.
Yes.
And what I would want is a few closing words. What sort of advice or counseling you can give to that society that you are managing in terms of disaster?
Well, the appeal out to the Dominican public and also to the region is to get on board with us, be partners with us.
Yes.
As you rightly said, we can't do it alone. We need partnership, we need collaboration. We need the researchers on our side also, and so we need to get everybody on board with us. And the way you can start doing that is to join your disaster committees at the committee level, and tap into our programs, whether it be at the ODM, whether it be from the University of the West Indies, and get yourself informed as to what is happening in the world around you, in the environment around you, and be part of the solution rather than just sitting on the sidelines watching it unfold, because it's going to unfold, and you have to be in a position to know what to do, and to be part of the process to minimize or mitigate, as was rightly said, and to do adaptations to what is unfolding in front of us.
Okay, Don, I said almost your closing remarks, but we'll say a little more. And Don is not about, neither is Matthew Wilson, doom and gloom. It is that awareness that has to be brought through education, continued research. So we'll speak a little more and have them to make some real closing remarks in terms of counseling, advising, when we return after a word from our sponsors, who else? The University of the West Indies.
I'm part of a tough, smart,
constantly evolving,
never too old to learn community of human beings.
proud of country,
Proudly Caribbean, global citizens.
with convenient access to over 400 learning programs
Delivered both online and face-to-face.
from the Caribbean's University of First Choice.
My mind,
My life.
my world of possibilities is wide open.
Call, click, or visit the UWI Open Campus.
Well, the internal clock in me, I felt as if we had been for an hour, knowing how an hour passes so quickly when you are listening and viewing the University of the West Indies and You program, your favorite program. You look forward to every third Thursday of each month to be educated, to be informed. And that is the main function of the University of the West Indies arm, the fourth campus, the open campus. And here at the Dominica site, everything we do here on these programs are being recorded on University of the West Indies, or UWI, or UWI, YouTube UWI, let's get it right, YouTube UWI /Dominica. So you can see your favorite programs over and over, almost like a soap opera, but a very serious one. Let us now ask of Dr. Wilson of some, not closing remarks necessarily, you will feel that when we reach here, but what can you summarize about your purpose of being here? Invited by the University of the West Indies Open Campus, Dominica site.
Well, I should, of course, thank the Open Campus for the invitation, and also the National Bank of Dominica for facilitating that. It's a true honour to be here, and I'm very happy to have been, to be able to continue to educate. This is really, and raise awareness of climate change. That's really the reason I thought this is a great opportunity. So in summary of what we need to do, we can take a look at the graphic. Moving forward, we need to mitigate against climate change. Mm-hmm. We need to lobby major emitters, and I would encourage everyone to become interested and pursue parliamentarians to try to get them to speak up about climate change, because politicians listen to the people. Mm-hmm. So the people need to raise their voices about it. We also need to reduce our own emissions and pursue a green economy. We need to lead by example. We need to try to encourage others to reduce their emissions, but at the same time do that ourselves. Secondly, we need to adapt. We are going to be facing climate change in any case. It's inevitable. We already are facing it. We're already seeing the consequences of it. So we need to make appropriate and evidence-based adaptation measures and do that in conjunction with mitigation. Now, a key thing is that many of the measures we can take, we need to do as part of development in any case. And by taking those development measures, we are becoming better able to cope with the effects of climate change. We will be adapting to climate change. But we need to develop with climate change in mind. And thirdly, education and research. We need to increase awareness to enable empowerment, to make decisions, to enable people to be able to be aware of what to do in their own lives to be able to cope with the effects of flooding and storms and increases in things like that. We need research to define our own solutions, and I think this is really one of the key areas where UWI is contributing. And you mentioned earlier on that the Open Campus can be part of the research. It is, exactly. A very important part of research is dissemination of research. It's not just about scientific publications, which are of course important, but those are to communicate to other scientists. We also need to communicate to the public, and that's exactly what we're doing this morning or this evening with this program. And so we define our own solutions, and it's really important because the well-being of our future economies and society really depends on how we respond to climate change today. We need to make the investments today to be able to cope with the effects that we will experience in the future. We cannot wait for those effects to occur and hope to be able to cope. We of course all want to continue living in a good society with lots of good well-being. So we need to invest in our futures, our children's futures and their children's as well.
Yeah, Don, this is sound advice.
And we have started the ball rolling, in fact, with the Ministry of agriculture, again under the World Bank project, with the focal point being the Environmental Coordinating Unit. We were able to secure in excess of $35 million, about $40 million to do mitigation works as it relates to climate change and climate change adaptation. And that will be rolling off sometime this year. The projects will start rolling off sometime this year. But I'd like to reiterate or reinforce what Dr. Wilson is saying, the importance of research and the importance of policy and the lobbying of our policy makers and our decision makers up to the level of the administration, the political directorate, to have policies and programs mainstreamed into our development processes that take into account in a critical way disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. For more information, I know it's a UWI program, but I can't help but advertise.
Feel free. We pay for the program, so feel free to advertise.
Join us, be an ODM partner, and you can get more information.
ODM. When you use those acronyms, people really want to know what ODM means.
It's simple, Office of Disaster Management.
Well,
ODM.
yes, well said.
Right.
You see, when we use that military language, you understand, I may understand, but it doesn't mean that my colleague in Portsmouth or Marigot or Grand Bay.
I'm sure ODM is almost
ODM.
a household
They
name.
may wonder if ODM is almost like a medical term.
No.
ODM is?
Office of Disaster Management.
Office of Disaster. Are you aware of that? There is an Office of Disaster Management, and now Acting Director Don Corriette.
So you can go on our website www.odm.gov.dm for additional information, and also on our partners website CDEMA, www.wereready.org, and trust me, you'll get all the information that you ever needed about climate change and climate change adaptation, and also on comprehensive disaster management.
Okay, you see, whenever one gives a website, I feel happy. I don't know if you feel the same way, Dr. Matthew Wilson, because guess it, W stands for what?
Wilson.
WW. There are two of us here. If Don wants to change from Corriette to W, he's welcome. Yes. But that is how websites are usually given. www. And I see also another linkage to Dr. Matthew Wilson. The W is what is the first letter in weather, and the measurement of which it leads to climate change. So he's in the appropriate field. Your closing comments, Dr. Wilson.
Well, yes.
I had a little fun at your expense.
That's quite all right.
That is what cousins do. Yes.
We're both from Scotland, right?
Scotland, yes.
So I would say in closing that I would raise the flag of education as being so crucial. Once again, it's one of the main reasons that UWI exists is to educate. And at UWI St Augustine now we have a new Department of Geography, which I'm the head of. I'm honoured to be the head of that department. And in that department we are running degrees in geography. So I would encourage anyone interested to take a look at our website to be able to look at those degree programs. Geography, like I mentioned earlier, is such a key discipline because it encompasses everything about climate change and society and the effects that climate change may have on it. So anyone out there interested in doing a geography program, please do get in touch.
Okay, and I don't want to leave with any sad note, but I think I made mention to Dr. Wilson that increasingly in our schools, people are moving away from geography. They're not doing geography. I know in many schools in Dominica, we don't do geography. We focus more on social studies, which is, a mixture of geography, history, and you name it, civics. Probably we should go back to what we were all proud of, doing geography, not just knowing capitals, but knowing much more about climate change. It depends on you. Thank you for listening and viewing.
Thank you, Doc.